Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Non Tet. We are in the middle of discussing the exact placement of the Mizbeach in the Azara. Is it to the north, to the south, or in the middle? And in that regard, we cited a Mishnah in Masechet Midot. And we already discussed two opinions. Either it is that Mishnah, which is anonymous, it was authored by Rabbi Yosef ben Halafta, and he says that the Mizbeach was entirely in the north. But then just now we said, actually, maybe it could be Rabbi Yehuda, and we can explain that the Mizbeach was exactly in the middle. Now we're going to bring a third opinion, that this is also Rabbi Yosef, but this is a different Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, but it so happens that Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, who is going to agree with Rabbi Yosef ben Halafta, and also say that the Mizbeach is in the north. So here we go. V'Rav Sherevya Amar Hamaneh Rabbi Yosef HaGalili. He, the author of that Mishnah, can be Rabbi Yosef HaGalili. The Tanya. Rabbi Yosef HaGalili Omer Mitoch shene'emar v'natata et hakiyor ben ohel moed lamizbeach ve'gomer. So we're going to cite a baraita in which Rabbi Yosef HaGalili teaches. But from this baraita, we're going to have to do some calculations, and by process of elimination, we'll end up that he thinks the Mizbeach was in the north, and therefore can fit with Rabbi Yosef ben Chalafta's interpretation of that Mishnah Masechet Midot. And the pasuk that he's basing his proof off of is a pasuk that says that the kiyor, the washing basin. This is one drawing of what it might have looked like. So the washing basin that the Kohanim use, where was it? The pasuk in Sefer Shemot says you place the kiyor between Ohel Moed and the Mizbeach. So it has to be somewhere within that space between the opening of the Hechal and the Mizbeach. Now, furthermore, the pasuk says ve'et Mizbach ha'olah, that the Mizbach ha'olah has to be at the entrance of Ohel Moed. So that means that the Mizbech itself has to be in front of the entrance, and there shouldn't be anything that's blocking the way. So we have two Pesukim that seem to contradict each other. On the one hand, the Mizbeach has to be right in front of the opening of Ohel Moed. On the other hand, the Kiyor has to be somewhere in the middle there. So how do we do that? Mizbeach bepetach Ohel Moed velo Kiyor bepetach Ohel Moed. From the second pasuk, we learned that the Mizbeach is at the entrance of Ohel Moed, and the Kiyor then would not be at the entrance of Ohel Moed. Hechan hayadot no. So where are you going to put it? Ben ha'olam v'la Mizbeach mashuch kim'a kelapeh hadarom. And the answer is, you will put it between the ulam and the Mizbeach. The Ulam is the big entrance hall, and the Mizbeach, but you're going to move it southwards somewhat. And here is a picture of that. This is going to be the conclusion, that according to the Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, it's going to work out the best if you put the Mizbeach in the north. This is the north side here. Mizbeach is entirely in the north, so if we take the midline of the openings, it's the midline of both the openings of the Echel and the Ulam, so that will be the southern border of the Mizbeach. So now we have the Mizbeach entirely in the north, and the area that's in front of the opening is entirely clear. So that's no problem. We have a straight line here all the way in. And the Kiyor has to be between. Well, it is. Between means anywhere in the space here that's between the line of the Mizbeach and the opening, and it also is in front of the opening. So this is very good. It fulfills all the possibilities of both Pesukim, and that will be the conclusion. But we're going to prove that that is actually the only possibility. So here we go. My kasabar. I kasabar kole mizbeach badarom ka'e nokme mikotel hechal v'ladarom ben ulam la mizbeach. So what does Rabbi Yosef HaGalili think about where the Mizbeach is? If he thinks that the Mizbeach is entirely in the south, in that case, we should place the Kiyor just south of the wall, the edge of the wall of the Hechal, and between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. In other words, here, if the Mizbeach was entirely south, well then you can put the Kiyor in this light gray area, because this will be still in between. It's between the Mizbeach and the Ulam, and it's a little bit south of the entranceway so that it's not blocking the Mizbeach. Mizbeach has to have a clear view right into the Hechal, assuming that this opening of the Hechal is the most important one. So there's a clear view. The Kior is not blocking that view, so that's no problem. And if you put the Kior in this light gray area, then you'll be okay. And so it could also be in front of the entrance and between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. Since Rabbi Yosef does not say this, but rather in the Braita, Rabbi Yosef Galili says that you put it here southward, well, that means that he doesn't think that the Mizbeach is all the way south. And furthermore, maybe Rabbi Yosef Galili thinks that the holiness of the Echal and the Ulam are equal, and so therefore we can use the wider opening. Well then, in that case, we could put it still in the gray area here. In other words, if this entire, the Ulam opening is just as holy, and therefore you want the Mizbeach to have an unobstructed view and nothing in between. Okay, so fine, don't put the Kiyod right here. Put the Kiyod further south in this dark gray area, and that way it'll be in front of the Ulam. It doesn't have to be in front of the opening precisely, but it's in front of the Ulam area and between the Mizbeach, and so he could say that. But he doesn't say that, so that means that he does not think that the Mizbeach is in the south. So let's try the middle. If he thought that the Mizbeach is exactly in the middle, as in this picture here, and he also thought that the entrance of the Hechal is the more important one, so then you want the Mizbeach to be in front of that, and nothing in between. Good, so you have that here, and then you can have the Kiyod in this light gray area, and that will be just south, and it'll be in the front of the opening of the Ulam and between, and that would be the best place. But Rabbi Yosef does not say that either. He says it should be all the way south, and so that can't be it. And even if Rabbi Yosef thinks that the big opening is just as holy as the little opening, and they want the entire Mizbeach to have a clear view, fine, you could still do that and put the Kiyod in this dark gray area, and that way also it'll be exactly between the Mizbeach and the Ulam, and so that will work out very well. But Rabbi Yosef does not say that. Instead, he says it should be south of it over here, and so we can prove based on this, it must be, according to Rabbi Yosef Galili, that the entire Mizbeach is in fact in the north. And now we ask about that conclusion. Even if you say that the entire Mizbeach is in the north, why not put the Kiyod alongside the Mizbeach, between the Ulam and the Mizbeach, exactly in the north, in that north section? In other words, here's a different picture that will make it clearer. So here we have the Mizbeach entirely in the north, and Rabbi Yosef says that you have to put the Kiyod a little bit south over here. But why? Why can't you put it in this area? And that will have the benefit that it's literally between the Mizbeach and the Ulam, between the wall of the Mizbeach and the wall of the Ulam. And rather than here, where it's in front of the opening, but it's not really in front of the Mizbeach. So why not put it in this area? And we're about to ask, and even if you say that we want to use the big opening, okay, so we don't want anything obstructing the view of the Mizbeach to the big opening, so then look at this picture. Here we have unobstructed view, and you can put the Kiyod in this area. It'll be in the north, and it'll be between the Mizbeach and the Ulam. So even if it's in the north, why not, if the whole Mizbeach is in the north, why not put the Kiyod there? As we say here, right? If you want the bigger opening, so put it between the Ulam and the Safon, and the Ulam towards the north, between the Ulam and the Mizbeach. So why not do that? Amar kira safona, she safon panui mikelim, because the pasuk In Vayikra says, he shall slaughter the korban on the side of the altar northward. That this you can use the northern section to do the slaughter of this korban, and that means the entire area of the north should be free of other kelim. If you clutter it up with other vessels like the kior, then that area will not be available to use for the slaughter of the korbanot of Kodesh Kodashim, and therefore you can't put any kelim in the north part, and that's why the best solution is, when the mizbech is here, if the mizbech is here, is to put the kior right down here. It's in front of the olam, it's on the other side of the line of the mizbech, even though it's not directly in front of the mizbech, but that's the only way to make sure that you will not have anything in the north and nothing obstructing the view between the mizbeach and the opening. Now we have one more opinion. Mantana de Paliga le Rabbi Yosef Galili. Who disagrees with Rabbi Yosef Galili? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov he detanya. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer safona shehe safon panui mikilum va'afilu min hamizbeach. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says in a baraita that this same pasuk safona, that you're going to slaughter the korban in the north, that means you can't have anything in the north, not even the mizbeach. The north has to be totally clear from everything. And so therefore, while we saw already two possibilities, that the two Rabbi Yosef says, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yosef ben Chalafta think it's in the north, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's in the middle, but now we have the last opinion, we don't have a picture here, of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that's who says that the north part has to be completely clear. Nothing there, not even a mizbeach. According to him, the entire mizbeach must be in the south. Amar Rav, mizbeach shenifgam kol hakodashim shenishchatu sham pesulim. Mikrahu biyadenu ushchachnuhu. Rav says that the law is that if you have a mizbeach and it became damaged, a piece fell off and now it's no longer a valid mizbeach. However, there was already animals, sacrificial animals, that you did shechita. You did shechita to the animal while the mizbeach was still whole. And now you're waiting to sprinkle the blood. In the meantime, the mizbeach becomes pagum. So what happens to those animals? They are pasul, they're disqualified. Even if you fix the mizbeach, still, because at that time, there's no way to sprinkle the blood, so the entire sacrifice becomes disqualified. Rav says that is the halacha, and I know we had a pasuk to prove it, but we forgot what the pasuk is. Kisalik Rav Kahana shkechel Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbi dekama mishum Rabbi Ishmael v'Rabbi Yosef. And when Rav Kahana went from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, where Rav originally studied in Eretz Yisrael, so Rav Kahana found Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, and who said, in the name of Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, how do we know that if a mizbeach became nullified, damaged, that all sacrificial animals that had been slaughtered there will become pasul? Because pasuk says in Shemot, you should make a mizbach adama, and there you will slaughter upon it olot and shelamim. What does it mean upon it? Are we slaughtering on top of the mizbeach? We did learn that yes, it's possible, but you don't have to slaughter it on top. So it can't mean literally that we're slaughtering on top. Ela kishu shalem velo kishu chaser. Rather, it means that you have to slaughter the animal while the mizbeach is whole, and not while the mizbeach is damaged. And therefore, if you have the mizbeach and it becomes damaged, and you slaughter an animal, it's no good. It is disqualified. Amar hainu kerad ishtemit le-Rav. And then Rav Kahana says, yes, that's it. That's the pasuk that Rav was relying on, that he had forgotten. Rabbi Yochanan amar echad ze ve'echad ze pesulin. Now Rabbi Yochanan says something related to the subject, that both this and that are both pasul. What is both? What is he including in this? B'may pilige. What is the argument about? Rav savar ba'alei hayim ena nidchin. Rabbi Yochanan savar ba'alei hayim nidchin. Rav says if the animal is alive, you consecrated the animal, but still alive. You didn't do shechita yet. And while it's alive, the mizbeach becomes damaged. The animal is still consecrated. You didn't slaughter it yet. fix the Mizbeach, and then slaughter it, and you can still bring that animal. The animal is not going to be deferred, nidche. It's not going to become permanently disqualified. Although you're right, you have this animal that was consecrated, and if the Mizbeach becomes pasul, right now, I can't slaughter the animal because I have nothing to do with it. I can't put the blood anywhere. So leave it. So it's temporarily disqualified, but once you rebuild it, then it's okay. Now, Rav does say that if the animal is slaughtered, then it's no good. You slaughtered it beforehand, and then it broke, or it broke, and then you slaughtered it. Well, at the time while it's slaughtered, once it becomes deferred, once it becomes no good, unable to use, while the mizbeach, at the time that it's slaughtered, the mizbeach is not usable. Then that becomes permanently deferred. You can't use that even if you rebuild the mizbeach right away. But according to Rav, if the animal's alive, then you can slaughter it later when you rebuild. But Rabbi Yochanan says even animals that are alive become permanently deferred. You have a whole bunch of animals that were sanctified. Good, so they're sanctified. They're waiting their turn to be placed on the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach, it becomes damaged. All those animals are permanently deferred, cannot be used again. Me'atibeh, a challenge against Rav. כל הקודשים שהיו עד שלא נבנה המזבח ואחר כך נבנה מזבח פסולין. Any sacrificial animals that are around, that were sanctified before the mizbeach was built, and then they built the mizbeach. One sanctified a bunch of animals before there was any mizbeach, and then you built it. Those animals are all pasul. We see that even though they are alive, they become pasul. So isn't that a challenge too, Rav? Nivna dechuyin meikaraninu. Wait a second. Before it was built, if you sanctify an animal before the mizbeach is even built, then they are deferred from the beginning, and everybody agrees that if you consecrate an animal at a time when there's no mizbeach, then the initial sanctification is already no good, and therefore that will be permanently deferred from the beginning. Everyone agrees to that. We're only talking about a case where you sanctified the animal when the mizbeach is there. Then, at some point, the mizbeach got damaged, and the animal is still alive. That's the machloket. This Mishnah is not. This Baraita is not talking about that case. Okay. Okay. In fact, nobody would say that there's any machloket about this. Rather, let's change the words of the Baraita to be a challenge against Rav. Okay. So maybe the Baraita actually should read that any sacrificial animals that were made sanctified before the Mizbeach was destroyed. The Mizbeach was destroyed at the end of the first Bet HaMikdash. And so, you sanctified it while the Bet HaMikdash was up and the Mizbeach was totally there. And then the Mizbeach was destroyed. Those animals become pasul. Challenge against Rav. Rav, you said that if it's alive, then it still remains. So why not wait till the second temple is built? And then the Mizbeach will be there again, and then you could use them. Now we ask, Neheras ha iskunde. Wait, if you're waiting from the time the first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed until the second Bet HaMikdash is built, that's 70 years. The animal's going to be way too old. You're probably not going to live that long, and will not be a kosher and a valid animal no matter what. So what do you mean? What kind of case you're talking about? It's not going to last until the next Bet HaMikdash is built. Okay, rather, change the Baraita again so that we can revive our question against Rav and say, any animal that was sanctified before the Mizbeach became pagum. So you sanctified the animal while the Mizbeach was fine. Then the Mizbeach became damaged. And then the Ad Shalom of Gam was sanctified before the Mizbeach was damaged, and then the Mizbeach was damaged. Pesulin is no good. Well, this is exactly the case where Rav said it's okay because it's still alive, and so you sanctify it while the Mizbeach was there. Good, that's a good sanctification. While it's alive, it got damaged, and you fixed it. Okay, so according to Rav, it's not pasul permanently. You can still bring it. Challenge against Rav. So the answer is easy. You already changed the wording of the Braita 2 times in order to make it a question against Rav. Okay, while you're at it, you're already changing the wording of the Braita, so change it again and say, actually, it should say nishchatu, and say any sacrificial animal that was slaughtered before the Mizbeach was damaged. So you slaughtered it, and the Mizbeach is fine. But then, before you sprinkle the blood, the Mizbeach becomes no good. Pasul, yes, everybody agrees with that. Even Rav would agree with that. And so therefore, the original version of the Braita is not a question. And once you're changing it, so then you can change it also to agree with Rav. Ve'ha'amar Rav Gidel amar Rav, Mizbeach shene'ekar maktirin ketoret bimkomo. Now a further challenge against Rav Gidel said in the name of Rav that if the Mizbeach is uprooted, you could still make ketoret on the floor where the Mizbeach was. Meaning, you don't actually need a Mizbeach to make ketoret, because you could just make it on the floor where it was. And therefore, if the Mizbeach is damaged, even if the Mizbeach is not even there, that doesn't make it that doesn't mean that the animals cannot be sacrificed. In fact, you can sacrifice the animals on the floor, and that would be just fine. So therefore, even if you did shechita and then the Mizbeach gets pagum, so what? Can't you just do the korban on the floor and it would still be valid? The answer for Rav is to borrow something that Rava said regarding the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to see what this is in just a minute and continuing on to the next daf. But we see over there that Rabbi Yehuda says that it's true that korbanot can be made on the floor of the temple courtyard. You can do shechita there, and certainly, as we always do, and certainly you can even burn the emurim, the sacrificial portions. You make a fire. It doesn't usually you put it on the mizbeach, but you don't have to. You can make a fire on the floor and burn the insides on the floor. However, even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that when it comes to the blood has to be sprinkled on the sacrifice on the mizbeach. So yes, you can make ketoret on the floor, you could burn the insides on the floor, but for the blood that needs a mizbeach. And just like Rava said that about Rabbi Yehuda, in a different context, we say the same thing here, that Rav, although Rav does agree over here that you can do the ketoret on the floor, yes, that's fine, but he would agree that when it comes to the blood of an animal sacrifice, that has to be on the mizbeach, and therefore you did shechita, and then the mizbeach becomes disqualified. Well, then there's no way to bring that korban without having a mizbeach, because you can't do anything with the blood. You need a mizbeach, and therefore it does become disqualified. Now we ask, what was the statement that Rabbi Yehuda said? He said something about using the courtyard floor in order to make a korban, in order to even burn the innards. Where did Rabbi Yehuda say that you can make you can burn the insides of a korban on the floor? Detanya bayomahu kidash hamelech et toch hechaser vegomer ki mizbeach. And then here it said Shasa Moshe, but that's not what the pasuk says. Katon mehachil. Let's look at the pasuk inside, and here it says Bayomahu, on that day when King Shlomo was consecrating the Bet Hamikdash. It says Kidash Hamelech Toch HaChaser. King Shlomo sanctified the inside of the middle of the courtyard. Asher lifnei Bet Adonai, that's in front of the Hechal. Because it seems that it's saying on the courtyard he sacrificed the korban olah, the mincha, the shelamim. Why? Why did he do it on the floor? Because the copper mizbeach that's in front of Hashem. This is referring to the outside mizbeach. In the time of Moshe, in fact, was made out of copper or bronze. So we're going to be discussing, was this Mizbach HaNechoshet, Asher Lifnei Hashem, is this the one that Moshe made in the Mishkan, or is it the one that Shlomo made? What is this referring to? Anyway, whichever one it is, it says it was too small. He made so many, we're going to see 144,000 korbanot. And so the Mizbeach was too small, and therefore King Shlomo had to sanctify the floor and he made the korbanot on the floor. And so we see from here that yes, you can burn korbanot on the floor. Devarim kichtaban, according to Yehuda, we take this pasuk literally. That's in fact what they did. They burnt the korbanot on the floor. We're going to see on the next stuff that Rava comments about this. Oh yes, the korbanot on the floor. The blood, yes, they had to sprinkle on the mizbeach. There's no problem. There's plenty of room for just a few drops of blood for many korbanot. But the floor was used in order to burn the innards. Okay, so that's where we already see where the context of Rabbi Yehuda, but it happens to be that this Baraita goes on a long machloket. Amar lo Rabbi Yosef, v'lo kivar ne'emad 1,000 olot ya'aleh Shlomo al hamizbeach hahu. Pasuk says earlier that King Shlomo offered 1,000 olot on that altar, meaning on the old altar, the one that Moshe made, the one that was in the Mishkan. ואילו בבית עולמים הוא אומר, ויזבח שלמה את זבח של משה זבח להשם בקר 22,000, whereas on the new Mizbeach that King Shlomo built for the Bet HaMikdash, it said that he offered peace offerings 22,000, and the pasuk continues with 120,000 sheep. That's 142, not 144, 142,000 korbanot, still a lot altogether. Now, it sounds like it's a lot more. It is a lot more. But in terms of the ratio, if you take into account the number of animals and the number of amot on which you can make a fire on the Mizbeach, you'll see that the ratio of the original Mishkan Mizbeach is actually greater. How so? Well, how big was the original Mizbeach in the Mishkan? According to Rabbi Yosef, he's assuming it was 5 by 5, meaning the inner parts where the horns are, was 5 by 5. So that means you cannot use that entire square. And then if you take that away, you get a 3 by 3. You're taking Amah from both sides, so a 3 by 3 square. And the Kohen needs room to be able to walk around it so he can work. And that leaves only one in the middle. The entire thing is 9 amot, but you already have to take off one on each side for the yesod and another on each side for the sovev. So you're already taking off, 2, there's 7, and 2 more from that leaves 5, and you'd have to take off 2 more because of the kedanot, and another 2 for room to walk around. You end up with only 1 amah where you can actually make a fire. Now you have 1,000 amot, 1,000 korbanot on a 1 amah square. Well, that's 1,000 to 1 ratio. Okay, that's fine. But here's the thing. If you look at the Mizbeach that King Shlomo made, the middle part is actually 20 by 20, which is 400 square feet. So if you can do 1,000 korbanot per amah square, then over here, if you have 20 by 20, you should be able to make 400,000 with the same ratios, which is way more than 142,000. And therefore, Rabbi Yosef says, the new Mizbeach that Shlomo made was plenty big to do all the korbanot, and he did not have to use the courtyard floor. Rather, in the pasuk, when it says the Mizbeach was too small, it was talking about Moshe's original Mizbeach. And when you say it was too small, it was actually disqualified. It was not being used anymore. And in order not to say something in a derogatory way, it's kind of like someone says, this person is a dwarf. He's a Kohen. Now, a dwarf Kohen is actually, in fact, pasul. But that's nicer than saying pasul, right? And he's no good. They're just saying outright. It's better to make a description rather than to say something is pasul outright. And so therefore, really, the Mizbeach that Moshe made was discontinued, not used. And so, but instead of saying, it was better to say a nice way, oh, it was too small. Okay. And so therefore, he had to sanctify some of the courtyard in order to make a bigger Mizbeach on that area. He couldn't just be an area that was 9 by 9. He needed an area that was 28 by 28, or maybe 32 by 32. So in fact, the pasuk is not saying that the Mizbeach is too small. There was plenty of room on the Mizbeach, and in fact, King Shlomo did use this nice new Mizbeach that he made in order to make all the korbanot, and he did not burn anything on the floor. So Rabbi Yosef disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda thinks that they did it on the floor, and Rabbi Yosef thinks, no, there's plenty of room, and just look at the ratio based on the older Mizbeach. Now we ask, Rabbi Yehuda, Shapir Kama Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, what's he going to say? Doesn't Rabbi Yosef have a good point? And they'll answer, Rabbi Yehuda l'tameh damar Mizbeach she'asa Moshe gadol haya. No, Rabbi Yehuda follows his own opinion. He says that the Mizbeach that Moshe made was not just 5 by 5, meaning from counting the corners, the horns. The Tanya 5 amot orech ve5 amot rochav. Devarim kichtavan divrei Rabbi Yosef. We learn in another braita that they argued about the dimensions of Moshe's Mizbeach, where Rabbi Yosef says, when the Pasuk says it's 5 by 5, that means literally 5 by 5, as exactly is in this picture here, meaning the inside part of the horns is 5 by 5. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ne'emar kan rabua, v'ne'emar lehalan rabua, ma lehalan me'em sa'ito haya moded, afkan me'em sa'ito haya moded. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says, it says in Shemot rabua, it's square. It also says in Yechezkel, the same word, rabua, square. But in Yechezkel's description of a future Bet HaMikdash and Mizbeach, it's clear there that when it says a measurement is talking about from its middle, meaning that the numbers that it's giving is from the middle in all four directions. So too, here it's from the middle and in all four directions. So in other words, when you say 5, it means you go to the middle and you count 5 in this direction or up and 5 in the other direction down, which means the middle part is actually 10 by 10. And so according to the Yehuda, if you have 10 by 10, okay, you still have to take off that area, and you have to take off an area so that the Kohanim can walk. So you're going to go down to 6 by 6, which is in the middle, which is 36, but that means it's still 1,000 korbanot per 36 square amot. And so that is a much lower ratio, and that ratio would not be enough for King Shlomo to make 142,000 korbanot. This is bigger, but it's not that much bigger. 400 is not enough, not sufficiently bigger than 36 square amot, and so therefore Rabbi Yehuda is consistent with his opinion and says, no, according to the ratio of how many things you can burn, the Mizbeach of Shlomo was not big enough, and in fact, they did have to use the floor space. Now, in Yechezkel, how do you know that the dimensions mentioned there means counting from the middle and going on to all sides, so that you double it? Tichtiv hariel shetem esre amah lechol ruach, o eno ela shetem esre al shetem esre, keshomer al ba'at reba'av melamed she'emsa hu moded. It says in the pasuk in Yechezkel that the hearth, the place where you can burn things, will be 12 cubits long by 12 cubits wide, square to its 4 sides. So that means you have to do 12 in every direction. Is it 12 in every direction, meaning 24 by 24? Or does it mean only 12 by 12? Because it's 24, because when the pasuk continues and says on all 4 sides. If it was just 12 by 12, you'd say 12 on 2 sides. On both sides, it was 12. What do you mean on 4 sides? That means 4 directions. That means you start in the middle and you go in all directions. And if that's how you measure the Mizbeach described by Yechezkel through the Gezer HaShavah, that's also the way you measure the Mizbeach of the Mizbeach of Moshe. The continuation asks what Rabbi Yehuda will learn from that Gezer HaShavah, but that will take us well into the next daf, so we stop here. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.